Publicly branding me a nobody was Vincent Lancaster's ultimate power play. He handed his favorite son the keys to the kingdom, expecting his youngest to simply vanish. Instead, I built a $12 billion dynasty and returned to legally foreclose on the family that threw me away. To understand the absolute cruelty of my father, Vincent, you first have to understand his empire. Lancaster Century Properties was a titan of commercial real estate in New York, a ruthless machine that bought up distressed assets, bulldozed history, and erected towering glass monuments to corporate greed. At the helm was Vincent, a man whose heart was as cold and unyielding as the concrete foundations of his skyscrapers. He measured a man's worth strictly by his net worth, his aggression, and his willingness to step on throats. He had 2 sons. Only one fit his mold. Preston, the firstborn, was a carbon copy of our father, right down to the custom-tailored Brioni suits and the arrogant, predatory smirk. Preston had been handed the title of Vice President of Acquisitions at the age of 25. He spent his days networking on the manicured greens of the Shinnecock Hills Golf Club, driving a silver Porsche 911, and taking credit for deals structured entirely by the firm's overworked analysts. He was the golden boy, untouchable and blindly adored. Then there was me, Oliver. 3 years younger, I was the anomaly of the Lancaster bloodline, quiet, fiercely intelligent, and inherently repulsed by the cutthroat nature of my father's business. I had walked away from a guaranteed executive suite after college. Instead of evicting struggling businesses to build luxury condos, I was obsessed with the invisible architecture of the modern world: data and artificial intelligence. While Preston dined on Wagyu beef at Per Se on the company dime, I lived in a cramped, drafty apartment in Brooklyn, surviving on black coffee and ramen. I had spent the last 4 years building OmniNode, a predictive logistics AI designed to revolutionize global supply chains. It was complex, groundbreaking, and incredibly difficult to pitch to traditional investors. "Still playing with your little app, little brother?" Preston had sneered just weeks before our father's birthday. We had bumped into each other in the lobby of a midtown high-rise. I was there desperately trying to secure a seed meeting with a venture capital firm. Preston was there to sign a lease for a new luxury penthouse. "It's an enterprise software platform, Preston," I replied, keeping my voice even. I adjusted the strap of my worn messenger bag, acutely aware of the frayed cuffs of my off-the-rack jacket next to Preston's flawless Italian wool. "And it's entering beta testing next month." Preston laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "Right. Well, let me know when your platform can buy you a proper haircut. Dad's furious you missed the quarterly family dinner, by the way. He thinks you're a complete embarrassment. If I were you, I'd show up to his 60th with a serious apology and a resume. I might have an opening for a junior analyst to fetch my coffee." I bit my tongue. I knew the truth about my brother's business acumen. I still had a few friends inside Lancaster Century Properties who whispered the real numbers. Preston's last 3 acquisitions had hemorrhaged money. He had over-leveraged the firm on a series of commercial strip malls in the Midwest right before retail traffic plummeted. But Vincent buried the losses in creative accounting to protect his golden boy's reputation. For me, OmniNode wasn't just a business venture. It was my declaration of independence. It was my desperate, burning need to prove that success didn't require ruthlessness and that value could be created rather than simply extracted. But the journey had been brutal. My co-founder, a brilliant but equally broke engineer named Toby, and I had maxed out our credit cards. We had faced 72 rejections from venture capitalists who told us the market was too saturated or the technology was too ambitious for 2 guys working out of a Brooklyn living room. The pressure was mounting. My bank account was dipping dangerously close to zero. The server costs to run our AI models were astronomical, and AWS was threatening to suspend our account. I needed a miracle. Instead, I got an invitation to my father's 60th birthday gala. It arrived on thick, gold-embossed cardstock. The event was to be held at the Plaza Hotel. Black tie, high society. It was the absolute last place I wanted to be. surrounded by the sycophants and sharks that orbited my father. But Vincent had sent a terse email along with the invitation. Be there. Don't embarrass me by being absent. Against my better judgment, and perhaps driven by a lingering, foolish hope that my father might one day look at me with a fraction of the pride he reserved for Preston, I rented a tuxedo. It was a slightly ill-fitting piece that smelled faintly of dry cleaning fluid. A stark contrast to the bespoke garments that would fill the plaza's grand ballroom. As I stood before the mirror in my tiny apartment, straightening a cheap black bow tie, Toby looked up from his dual monitors. You really don't have to go, man, Toby said, rubbing his bloodshot eyes. We have that final patch to compile for the Sequoia Capital pitch deck. We finally got a meeting with a junior partner. We can't blow this. I know, I sighed, grabbing my keys. I'll make an appearance, shake his hand, and slip out before the entrees are served. I'll be back by midnight to run the tests. Little did I know, I wouldn't be slipping out unnoticed. I was walking directly into an execution. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was a sea of crystal chandeliers, flowing champagne, and the intoxicating scent of expensive perfume and old money. A string quartet played softly in the corner, entirely drowned out by the boisterous laughter of Wall Street bankers, real estate magnates, and local politicians. I felt entirely invisible as I navigated the room. I grabbed a glass of club soda from a passing waiter and retreated to the periphery, watching the spectacle. At the center of it all was Vincent Lancaster. He looked like a Roman emperor holding court, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, his broad shoulders filling out a custom Tom Ford tuxedo. Beside him stood Preston, holding a glass of Dom Perignon, laughing loudly at every joke our father made, acting as the perfect heir apparent. Oliver, the sharp voice cut through the ambient noise. It was my aunt, Beatrice, a woman whose face was pulled terrifyingly tight by multiple surgeries. She eyed my rented tuxedo with undisguised distaste. You made it. We were beginning to think you had crawled into a cave with those computers of yours. Hello, Aunt Beatrice, I said politely, forcing a tight smile. I've been busy. My company is nearing a major launch. Company. She scoffed softly, shaking her head as if I had just announced I was building a sandcastle. Your father worries about you, you know. He wishes you'd just swallow your pride and let Preston train you. You could be making real money. Before I could formulate a response that wasn't outright hostile, a sharp clinking of silver against crystal silenced the room. Vincent was standing at the main microphone on a raised dais, a glass raised high. The room fell into an immediate, reverent hush. Friends, colleagues, family. Vincent's booming, charismatic voice echoed through the ballroom. 60 years. They say it's a milestone. I say it's just a warm-up. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Preston, standing at the front table, beamed up at his father. I look back at what I've built with Lancaster Century, Vincent continued, his chest puffing out. An empire of steel, glass, and prime acreage. But an empire is only as strong as its legacy. And I am incredibly fortunate to have a son who understands the weight of that legacy. A son who has stood by my side, fought in the trenches of the boardroom, and proven that the Lancaster blood runs true. Vincent gestured grandly to Preston. Preston, come up here. Preston jogged up the steps, looking like he had just won an Oscar. The crowd applauded enthusiastically. Vincent clapped a heavy hand on Preston's shoulder. For your dedication, your brilliance, and for closing the staggering Chicago portfolio last quarter, Vincent said, blatantly ignoring the fact that the Chicago deal was currently hemorrhaging capital. I decided a simple watch wasn't enough for my right-hand man. Vincent reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a heavy, leather-bound folio. He handed it to Preston. Preston opened it, his eyes widening in theatrical shock. Dad, is this? The deed is in your name, son, Vincent announced to the room, his voice practically trembling with self-congratulation. A $5.5 million beachfront villa in Malibu, fully staffed, fully yours, to give you a place to rest when you're conquering the West Coast market. The ballroom erupted in cheers and applause. Preston hugged his father, hoisting the folio in the air like a championship trophy. The sheer extravagance of the gift was staggering. I stood in the back, my jaw tight. I didn't care about the money, or a house in Malibu, but the blatant, public anointing of Preston stung bitterly. But Vincent wasn't finished. He raised his hands to quiet the room. His eyes scanned the crowd, finally locking onto me standing in the shadows near the exit. A cruel, cold spark ignited in his eyes. "Of course," Vincent said, his tone shifting from triumphant to patronizing. The silence in the room grew heavy, expectant. "A father's love is complicated. We have our triumphs. And we have our disappointments." Every head in the ballroom began to turn. Hundreds of eyes followed Vincent's gaze, landing squarely on me. I froze, my grip tightening on my glass of club soda until my knuckles turned white. "My other son, Oliver, is here tonight," Vincent said, his voice dripping with theatrical pity. "Somewhere in the back, as usual, hiding from the real world." A few nervous chuckles broke out among the sycophants in the front row. Preston was smirking from the stage. "While Preston is securing multi-million-dollar deals and building the future of this city," Vincent continued, his voice echoing cruelly through the PA system, "Oliver prefers to play pretend. He sits in a dingy apartment, tapping on keyboards, chasing invisible numbers in the cloud. He refuses to join the family business. He refuses to contribute to society in any tangible way." My heart pounded against my ribs. The humiliation was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest. I could feel the pitying, mocking stares of the city's elite boring into me. "I offered him the world." Vincent lied flawlessly, spreading his hands. "I offered him a desk, a salary, a future, and he threw it in my face to be a nobody, to be a ghost playing with computers. So tonight, as I celebrate my legacy, let it be known that my legacy rests with Preston. Oliver," Vincent paused, delivering the final, devastating blow. "You are no longer a Lancaster. You are a nobody. And until you come to my office and beg for a job, you are no son of mine." The silence that followed was deafening. It was absolute, suffocating dead air. Preston's smirk widened. Aunt Beatrice looked away, feigning discomfort. I didn't yell. I didn't cause a scene. I simply looked at the man on the stage, a man corrupted entirely by his own ego, and realized I felt nothing but pity for him. Slowly, deliberately, I set my glass down on a nearby tray. The clink of the glass was the only sound in the room. I didn't break eye contact with my father. Then, I turned on my heel and walked out the heavy mahogany doors of the ballroom. I walked out of the Plaza Hotel and into the freezing Manhattan rain. I ripped the cheap bow tie from my neck and tossed it into a trash can. The cold air filled my lungs, and for the first time in my life, I felt utterly, terrifyingly free. The cord was cut. I owed them nothing. By the time I took the subway back to Brooklyn, my cheap tuxedo was soaked through. I burst through the door of my apartment, startling Toby, who nearly knocked over his coffee. "Whoa, dude, what happened to you?" Toby asked, staring at my drenched, intense appearance. "It's over," I said, my voice hard, lacking any of its usual hesitation. I walked straight to my workstation and fired up my monitors. "I'm officially disowned." He did it in front of 500 people. Toby's eyes went wide. "Oliver, I'm so sorry, man. Don't be." I interrupted, my fingers flying across the keyboard. It was the best birthday gift he could have ever given me. I have nothing left to lose. "Where are we on the Sequoia patch?" "It's compiled," Toby said quietly, sensing the dangerous, electric energy rolling off me. "But Oliver, we got an email while you were gone." I paused, glancing over. "A rejection?" "No," Toby swallowed hard, turning his monitor so I could see. "It's not from the junior partner at Sequoia. It's from Richard Hendricks at Pied Piper Ventures, and they CC'd a senior partner at Andreessen. They ran our beta code through their stress test models this afternoon. I leaned in, reading the harsh white glow of the text on the screen. The email was brief, but the words hit me harder than the freezing rain outside. Oliver, your routing algorithm just outperformed our internal benchmarks by 400%. We thought it was a glitch, so we ran it thrice. It's not a glitch. Do not sign anything with anyone. We are flying a team to New York tomorrow morning. We want to lead your Series A. Be ready to talk terms starting at 50 million. I stared at the number. 50 million. I looked back out the window, toward the distant, glowing skyline of Manhattan where my father was currently drinking champagne and celebrating his legacy. Toby, I said, softly, a slow, predatory smile touching my lips for the first time in months. Put on a pot of coffee. The nobody is going to work. 3 years can rewrite the architecture of an entire life. For me, the 36 months following my brutal public disownment were a blur of sleepless nights, transatlantic flights, and exponential, dizzying growth. The morning after the disastrous birthday gala, the team from Andreessen Horowitz arrived in New York, exactly as promised. Sitting in a cramped, windowless conference room in a rented WeWork space, Toby and I presented OmniNode to a panel of heavy-hitting venture capitalists, including real-world tech titans like Mark Andreessen and Doug Leone, who had dialed in to witness the algorithm's capabilities firsthand. When the pitch concluded, there was no haggling. The data spoke for itself. OmniNode's predictive logistics didn't just optimize supply chains, it practically saw the future, anticipating port congestions, weather delays, and fuel price spikes weeks before they happened. By the end of the week, Toby and I had signed a term sheet for a $50 million Series A round. We moved out of the Brooklyn apartment and into a sleek, expansive headquarters in Manhattan's Flatiron district. I traded my cheap ramen for catered office lunches, but my work ethic only intensified. I wasn't driven by a desire for yachts or luxury cars. I was driven by a quiet, burning need to build something undeniable. Within 18 months, OmniNode secured contracts with global shipping conglomerates like Maersk and retail giants like Walmart. Our software was quietly saving the global economy billions of dollars a quarter. When our Series C funding round closed, led by Founders Fund, the company was officially valued at $12 billion. Holding a 40% stake, I was suddenly one of the wealthiest self-made millennials on the planet. Yet, I remained a ghost to high society. I rarely attended galas, declined television interviews, and wore simple, unbranded clothing. I let my work speak for me. Across town, however, the Lancaster Century Properties empire was bleeding out. Vincent's blind faith in his golden boy, Preston, had finally collided with reality. The commercial real estate market had fundamentally shifted. Remote work had hollowed out downtown office spaces, and retail brick and mortar was taking a massive hit. The staggering Chicago portfolio, the very deal Preston had been praised for at the 60th birthday party, had become an unmitigated disaster. Preston had over-leveraged the company to acquire massive, outdated shopping centers just as foot traffic hit an all-time low. The anchor tenants, massive department store chains, were filing for Chapter 11 bankruptcy one by one. To cover the massive gaps in revenue, Preston had quietly taken out high-interest mezzanine loans from predatory private equity firms like Apollo Global Management, betting that the market would bounce back before the debt matured. He had hidden the true extent of the financial rot from our father. Vincent, comfortably detached from the day-to-day operations and spending his afternoons at the Shinnecock Hills Golf Club, assumed Lancaster Properties was as invincible as ever. He still believed his name commanded unquestioned respect. The illusion began to crack on a rainy Tuesday in October. Preston was sitting in his corner office, staring at a spreadsheet that was flashing red across every single column. The interest payments on the mezzanine debt were due in 10 days, and the firm's liquid capital was virtually non-existent. The banks were refusing to extend their credit lines. His phone rang. It was the chief restructuring officer from their largest lender, J.P. Morgan Chase. Preston, the voice on the other end, was brutally crisp. We've reviewed the revised projections for the Chicago assets. They are unacceptable. We are pulling our support. If you don't secure an external capital injection of at least 400 million by the end of the month, we will begin foreclosure proceedings on the collateral. The collateral was the Lancaster building, the crown jewel of the family's portfolio and the headquarters of their empire. Preston's hands shook so violently he dropped his heavy crystal Scotch glass. It shattered against the hardwood floor. He was out of options. He couldn't hide the losses anymore. He had to tell our father that the legacy he had been entrusted with was entirely, irrevocably bankrupt. While Lancaster Century Properties was quietly suffocating, I was being thrust into the global spotlight. Forbes magazine had been aggressively pursuing me for months. They recognized that the quiet founder of OmniNode was the most compelling tech story of the decade. Finally, at the urging of my public relations team, who argued that increased visibility would help our upcoming IPO, I agreed to a sit-down interview and a cover shoot. The journalist, a seasoned business writer named David Koscieniewski, met me at the OmniNode headquarters. David expected the usual tech bro bravado, a ping-pong table tour, followed by rehearsed buzzwords about disrupting the industry. Instead, he found a quiet, intensely focused young man who spoke about global logistics with the reverence of a poet, yet possessed eyes that looked like they had seen genuine warfare. During the 3-hour interview, David dug into my background. "Your rise is unprecedented," David noted, leaning forward over his digital recorder. "But your background is a bit of a black box. There are public records indicating you belong to the Lancaster real estate family, yet there's no mention of them in any of your corporate filings. Did your family's capital give you the runway to build OmniNode?" My expression remained perfectly neutral, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop. "I received no capital, no runway, and no support from the Lancaster family," I stated, my voice quiet, but carrying the weight of absolute truth. My company was built in a freezing apartment in Brooklyn, with maxed-out credit cards and a server held together by duct tape. David raised an eyebrow. "That sounds like an estrangement." I looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows, gazing at the Manhattan skyline. I could see the Lancaster building in the distance, an imposing monument of glass and steel. 3 years ago, on the night I needed my father's belief the most, he stood in front of 500 of New York's elite and publicly disowned me. I said, the words smooth and devoid of venom, but devastating in their clarity. He bought my brother a $5 million villa in Malibu and told the crowd that I was a nobody. He stated that his legacy rested solely with his eldest son. So, I walked away. I let them have their legacy. And I built my own. That is the only time I will speak on the matter. 2 weeks later, the annual Forbes 400 issue hit the newsstands. The cover featured a high-contrast, black-and-white photograph of me. I wasn't smiling. I wore a simple dark sweater, my arms crossed, looking directly into the camera with an expression of quiet, unstoppable power. The headline, printed in bold, gold lettering, read, "The $12 billion Nobody. How a disowned real estate heir built the AI brain of global trade." That morning, the atmosphere inside the Lancaster Century Properties boardroom was akin to a funeral. Vincent sat at the head of the massive mahogany table, looking 10 years older than he had the day before. The financial reports scattered before him painted a picture of absolute devastation. Preston was pacing near the windows, his tie undone, sweat beading on his forehead. "Dad, we just need more time. If we liquidate the suburban assets at a discount—" "Quiet," Vincent snapped, his voice raspy. He looked at the executives gathered around the table. Most of them were avoiding his gaze. The legacy he had spent 40 years building was collapsing, destroyed by the incompetence of the son he had worshipped. The heavy double doors of the boardroom swung open. It was Aunt Beatrice. She bypassed the security desk and marched directly into the room, her face pale beneath her immaculate makeup. "Beatrice, we are in the middle of a crisis meeting," Vincent growled, rubbing his temples. "I cannot deal with you right now." Beatrice didn't say a word. She walked to the head of the table and slammed a glossy magazine down right on top of the bankruptcy projections. It was the new issue of Forbes. Vincent stared at the cover, He stared at the face of the son he had humiliated, mocked, and discarded. He read the headline once. Then he read it again. The $12 billion nobody. Page 42. Beatrice whispered, her voice trembling. Read what he said about you, Vincent. Read what the whole world is reading this morning. With shaking hands, Vincent flipped the magazine open. He found the feature article. His eyes scanned the glossy pages until they locked onto the quote in bold text. He stood in front of 500 of New York's elite and publicly disowned me. He bought my brother a $5 million villa and told the crowd that I was a nobody. The silence in the boardroom was absolute. Preston stopped pacing. He walked over and looked over his father's shoulder at the magazine. All the colour drained from Preston's face. The net worth listed next to my name was a staggering number with 10 zeros. He's a billionaire, Preston choked out, his voice cracking. That stupid computer program made him a billionaire? Vincent slowly raised his eyes from the magazine to look at Preston. The contrast was physically nauseating. Preston, who had just lost hundreds of millions of dollars and single-handedly destroyed the Lancaster legacy. And me, the outcast, the nobody, who now held enough personal wealth to buy their entire failing company 3 times over and bulldoze it for fun. A profound, suffocating realization crashed over Vincent. He had bet his entire life, his entire reputation, on the wrong son. The karma was immediate, brutal, and entirely public. Vincent picked up his phone. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely unlock the screen. Dad, what are you doing? Preston asked, panic rising in his chest. I'm calling him. Vincent rasped, staring blindly at the keypad. I have to call him. He's family. He can save us. He has to save us. The drive from the suffocating, mahogany-panelled boardroom of Lancaster Century Properties to the Flatiron District took exactly 22 minutes. But to Vincent, it felt like a death march. He sat in the back of his chauffeured Mercedes Maybach, staring blankly at the rain-slicked streets of Manhattan. Beside him, Preston was practically vibrating with nervous energy, his usually perfectly styled hair falling into his eyes, his designer suit suddenly looking like a cheap costume. For 3 years, they had lived in a fortress of denial. Now, the walls had collapsed, and the only person holding a lifeline was the son Vincent had publicly thrown to the wolves. The Omninode headquarters occupied the top 10 floors of a newly renovated, ultra-modern glass skyscraper. Walking through the revolving doors, Vincent and Preston were immediately struck by the sheer, undeniable scale of my success. The lobby wasn't decorated with ostentatious art or heavy chandeliers. It was a cathedral of light and data. Massive holographic displays projected real-time global supply chain metrics, ships moving across the Pacific, freight trains crossing Europe, delivery drones navigating urban grids. It was the nervous system of the modern world, and I was its brain. Vincent approached the minimalist white security desk, suddenly feeling very old and acutely irrelevant. Vincent Lancaster, he told the security personnel, trying to summon the booming, authoritative voice that had commanded boardrooms for 4 decades. It came out thin and raspy. I need to see the CEO. I am his father. The security guard, a young man wearing a simple black polo with the Omninode logo, didn't flinch. He calmly tapped his earpiece. I have a Vincent and Preston Lancaster here. No appointment. There was an agonizingly long pause. Vincent's jaw tightened. In his world, doors opened before he even had to reach for the handle. Here, he was just another unscheduled visitor, begging for a sliver of a billionaire's time. Send them up to the 62nd floor, the guard finally said, gesturing toward a bank of private elevators. Conference room Alpha. The elevator ride was completely silent. Preston kept swallowing hard, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. When the doors parted, they stepped into a sprawling, open-plan office that hummed with quiet intensity. Hundreds of engineers, analysts, and executives moved purposefully. No one wore a tie. No one looked up to acknowledge the real estate magnates. An executive assistant led them into Conference Room Alpha, a massive glass box suspended over the city skyline. They waited for 45 minutes. Every tick of the wall clock felt like a hammer blow against Vincent's crumbling pride. Finally, the glass door slid open. I walked in. I wore a dark, fitted Henley shirt and dark jeans. I looked older, sharper, and completely devoid of the hesitation that had once defined my youth. I didn't carry a notebook. I didn't offer a handshake. I simply walked to the head of the table, sat down, and looked at the two men who had destroyed my past. Vincent. Preston, I said, my voice as smooth and cold as polished marble. You have exactly 5 minutes before my call with the SEC. Make it count. Vincent winced at the use of his first name. The ultimate sign of disrespect. Yet he was in no position to demand a title. He forced a strained, desperate smile, leaning forward and resting his trembling hands on the glass table. Oliver, my boy, Vincent began, attempting to inject warmth into a relationship that had been dead for years. It is incredible. Simply incredible what you've built here. I saw the Forbes cover. I always knew you had a brilliant mind. I didn't see the vision back then. I was blind. I didn't blink. I just stared, letting the silence stretch until Vincent began to sweat under the fluorescent lights. Cut the performance, I interrupted quietly. You didn't come here for a family reunion. You came here because JP Morgan Chase pulled their support for your Chicago portfolio this morning, and Apollo Global Management is demanding $400 million by Friday to cover Preston's catastrophic mezzanine debt. You are legally insolvent. Preston gasped, his head snapping up. How? How do you know the exact numbers? We haven't filed the public disclosures yet. I shifted my gaze to my older brother. The golden boy looked shattered, a hollow shell of the arrogant vice president who had mocked me in a midtown lobby 3 years ago. I run an artificial intelligence company that predicts global market fluctuations. Preston, I said, a hint of dark amusement playing at the corners of my mouth. I knew your Chicago assets were toxic 18 months ago. I watched you leverage the company's future on dying retail space. And I watched you hide the losses from the board. It wasn't hard to calculate the exact date your house of cards would collapse. Vincent swallowed his pride, dropping the facade entirely. Oliver, we are family. Blood. I know I made a mistake. A terrible, unforgivable mistake at the gala. I was arrogant, but Lancaster Century Properties is our legacy. My father built it, I expanded it, and it carries our name. If we default on Friday, the banks will seize the Lancaster building. They'll liquidate everything. We will have nothing. Vincent reached across the table, a pathetic, pleading gesture. I am offering you 49% equity in the company, a controlling interest in the board. Whatever you want, just provide the capital injection. Save the family name. I looked at my father's outstretched hand. I felt no anger, no sorrow, no vindication. I just felt an overwhelming sense of closure. The phantom of his father's approval that had haunted me my entire life finally evaporated. I pressed a button on the sleek console built into the table. A massive digital display on the far wall flared to life, projecting a complex web of corporate acquisitions, holding companies, and debt restructuring charts. You don't understand the modern world, Vincent, I said, standing up and buttoning my jacket. You think value is tied to a name on a brass plaque. You think equity in a dying brick-and-mortar empire is a bargaining chip. It's not. It's an anchor. I pointed to a specific, highlighted node on the digital map. It was a subsidiary holding company named Aegis Capital Group. 2 weeks ago, Apollo Global Management decided they didn't want the risk of a messy, public foreclosure on your assets. I explained. My tone strictly transactional. They bundled your mezzanine debt and sold it on the secondary market at a slight discount to a private equity firm. Vincent's brow furrowed in confusion, panic setting in. Who? Who bought the debt? I tapped the screen. The logo for Aegis Capital Group faded, revealing its parent company. Node Ventures, the investment arm of Omninode. The realization hit Vincent like a physical blow to the chest. He slumped back in his chair, all the air rushing out of his lungs. Preston buried his face in his hands, letting out a choked, pathetic sob. "You didn't come here to ask for a loan, Vincent," I said, leaning over the table, my eyes locking onto my father's horrified gaze. "You came here to beg your creditor for mercy." "Why?" Vincent whispered, tears of absolute defeat welling in his eyes. "To punish us? To destroy your own brother?" "No," I replied, turning my back on them to look out over the city. "That's your ego talking again, assuming my actions revolve around you. I bought your debt because my algorithms identified the Lancaster building and your suburban Chicago lots as optimally geographical hubs for our new automated drone dispatch centers. Your properties are valuable to me, but your company is not. I am not bailing you out. I am foreclosing on you." The silence in the room was absolute, heavier than the silence in the Plaza Hotel ballroom 3 years prior. The karmic circle was complete. The ultimate status reversal had been executed flawlessly. Legally, and without a shred of emotion. "The eviction notices will be served to your executive offices tomorrow morning at 9, I stated, checking my watch. "You have 30 days to vacate the Lancaster building." "Oh, and Preston?" Preston looked up. "The Malibu villa was listed as collateral in the fine print of the Apollo loans," I said, my voice finally betraying a sliver of icy satisfaction. "You don't own that anymore?" "Either. I believe Node Ventures is converting it into a corporate retreat for our senior engineers." I walked to the glass doors, pausing for only a fraction of a second before leaving them behind forever. "The 5 minutes are up," I said, not looking back. "Security will show you out. Goodbye, Vincent." As the doors slid shut, sealing the 2 broken men inside the glass room, I walked back onto the bustling floor of my empire. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. I simply sat down at my desk, pulled up the code for the next global update, and went back to work. I was no longer a ghost in the shadow of the Lancaster name. I was the architect of the future, and I had finally cleared the wreckage of the past.